So thank you very much to all our readers, and well done on getting through some very difficult names in that section. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes now, but before I do that, I'm going to pray. So Lord Jesus, would you take these words and would you speak through them? May what is of you stay with us, and what is not of you fall away. Amen. So I wonder if you've ever found yourself in a bit of a tough spot where you wanted to not lie exactly, but just bend the truth a little bit in some way to try and get out of it, or to make your situation feel a bit easier. One little white lie, what could it do? Or perhaps you found yourself making a really big decision by rushing headlong into it before realizing you've forgotten to slow down and ask God about the thing that you are doing. I'm going to assume that the average human has probably done both of those things at least one point in their life, quite possibly a bit more. So we're in kind of around halfway-ish in the book of Joshua at the moment. Israel are slowly taking the promised land. They've had times when they've been really faithful to God, so they've done what he said and lived as his people, and times when they have not and have fallen very far short. They are not perfect at all, but they are trying to follow God, even when, as we sometimes see, they rush on ahead a bit and forget God in the process. And today they meet a group of people called the Gibeonites, who have come up with a plan to trick the Israelites into making a deal with them. The reason that this all matters, because you may be forgiven for thinking, well, what's the problem? It's not an unreasonable thing to do, is that God has specifically told the Israelites not to make deals with people living in the land. However, we also know, if you've been following our sermon series, when we met a lady called Rahab, that God will also always make a way for people who want to follow him, which is something we see happening throughout this book. So a lot goes wrong for the Israelites to make this deal with the Gibeonites. They forget to ask God what he thinks. They just crack right on and do what they think is best. How often are you so convinced you think you know what is right that you forget to stop and slow down and ask God what he thinks about whatever situation you find yourselves in? In these stories we come across in the Bible, we are not meant to judge these people and think, oh, silly people doing that. We are meant to identify and find our place with these people who, like us, are faltering and at times failing, but trying to follow God. The other thing which goes wrong in this is that the Gibeonites trick Israel into making a deal with them. They're specifically asked, do you live nearby? No. Look at all these old supplies we've got. Look how far we must have come. No way, we're just down the road. But in the midst of their kind of lie or deception, the Gibeonites, who have never been taught about God, if you notice, still realize who God is. So one of the big purposes of the people of Israel at this time is to make God known. That's why they have certain rules. That's why they live the way they do. And if someone wants to follow the God of Israel, there is guidance in the laws and rules that the people of Israel follow about how these people can follow God, about how they can be brought into the people. But by deception is not the way. As I've said before, earlier in the book of Joshua, we met a lady called Rahab who realized who God is, and she says she knows that God is the Lord of heaven and of earth. In other words, the God of absolutely everything. And she is invited to join the people of Israel. The Gibeonites also now, if you notice, end up with a way in. It may not feel ideal, but it's actually the way in that they offered when they made the deal with the people of Israel. They say they offer to be their servants. So all Joshua really does is pick up on the deal that they have already made. The Gibeonites may well have some very selfish motivations in making this deal too. There's a lot of self-preservation involved. But we all have some selfish motivations in our faith at times, don't we? If we're really honest. They have not been honest, but they have tried in some vague way, shape, and form to acknowledge who God is and do something about it. And God is kind enough to honour even the most faltering steps of faith. But the truth comes out, as we heard in that second part of our reading, the Gibeonites have lied. And notice when Joshua calls them back to challenge them on this, he asks them why they deceived them. The question and the things which cause the response that follows is their lies. The consequences do not come because of who they are, but rather how they have lived and also the deal that they themselves have offered to make. But the Gibeonites have professed faith in God whilst not living like it. However, though they face consequences for this, they are not cut off from God. They take on the role of servants as they've offered, which I'm not going to pretend is easy or the ideal, but it is now also an essential role in the building of the temple. It is an essential role in what it means for the people of Israel to worship God. They have a role now in the people of God. So what are we to make of this whole story? What does it mean for us? What do we take from it? For those of you who've been following the big sermon series, I'd just like to note again that it stops us from categorising neatly insiders and outsiders quite as straightforwardly as we might think in God's people. The book of Joshua refuses to let us do that. But it's also worth thinking in this particular story, what goes wrong for the Israelites, what goes wrong for the Gibeonites. Israel are meant to be God's people. They know how to live. They know what to do. They've even got whole pages you can read of instructions of how to ask God what he thinks about certain things and how to listen to him. Israel are meant to be God's people. And why God's people? And yes, God's people may not consult God on every single minutiae of life. You probably don't pray in the morning, should I have toast for breakfast today? Or is it cereal? But when we come to the big decisions and the big questions, particularly things that are going to impact not just ourselves but other people as well, we are meant to slow down and listen for what God is saying, because we know and believe that he speaks to all of his people and that he wants to guide us. And the Israelites don't do that. They don't slow down and listen, and everything that kind of follows out of that stems from that decision not to listen to God. And then we've got the Gibeonites as well, who also lie. You can dress it up how you want. You can really understand their motivations, but they still lie, don't they, at the end of the day? And they have reasons for doing so. But rather than trusting God's mercy, they give in to their fear. It's easy to give in to our fears and to allow our ideas about what other people might do or even what God is like to let us behave in all kinds of ways that we know that we shouldn't. Have you ever told a lie to cover your back, to stop you or to get you out of trouble at work or school or somewhere else? You may not have even realized you were doing it at the time. The good news is, as we see in this story, God can work in and despite of our mess, and is kind enough to honor even the most faltering steps of faith, even when we forget to slow down and listen to God, or ask what he thinks, or get things wrong. He still works out his plans and purposes for us. So, as we always do in this service, we're going to have a little bit of time to think about and respond to some of the challenges of that passage. There's all kinds of ways we do that. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we do something. Today we're going to do something which is a bit more personal and quiet. So I'm going to tell you kind of what we're going to think about, and then I'm going to offer you a couple of different ways of doing this. So the questions I'd like you to think about or ponder on for a couple of minutes. Is there something you need to trust God in? Is there something you need to trust God in? And is there something you need to listen to God about? Is there something you need to trust God in? And is there something you need to listen to God about? You might want to think about both of those. You might just want to do one. And that's something, if you want to talk to someone about it, particularly perhaps if you're here in a family group, or you want to chat to the people on your table, you're welcome to. Equally, if you just like to sit and have some space for yourself to do that quietly, that's absolutely fine too. So if you are chatting on your tables, please do honour those who do want to take some space and think quietly. You will see on your table you've got some stones. Some people like to kind of take some concrete steps after having thought and prayed about something. So if you're one of those people, you might want to take one of those stones, bring them up to the front, and leave them at the foot of the cross down here as a sign both of committing to trust God and committing to listen to him. So in the book of Joshua, we hear about the Israelites building these towers of stone to remember who God is and what he has done. So there can be something really powerful in just putting something down by the cross as a sign of committing to trusting God and committing to listening to what he says. If you want to fiddle with one of those stones whilst you think about it, please do. If that's not your thing, please just sit, listen, and offer it to God in a way which is right for you. But we'll just have a few minutes to do that. And then, of course, if you want to grab like a tea or coffee or anything in that time, please do. And then just if you do want to leave a stone at the foot of the cross, just whenever you feel ready, please bring it up to the front, and I will call us back in a few minutes.